Hello. Okay. Can we see if this is, can you see on the Facebook or YouTube, is this working?
I don't have Facebook.
YouTube?
YouTube.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahabatihi ajma'in. Ba'd. So alhamdulillah, we've reached to halakha 18. And we're talking about control of anger. Yeah?
That's
And we're talking about control of anger. So at least we've got sound. Sorry folks, we're not getting the video, but it's not working, I don't know for what reason. So anyway, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, effects of anger. So before we talk about, what are the causes of anger and how do we treat them, let's look at, as we say, the qubah, or the ugliness of anger. So what are the effects, I think maybe for the ladies we need the speaker. So the effects of anger, it has effects outwardly, it has effects also inwardly. So among the effects inwardly, it blinds and deafens from all advice. So what happens is because of the anger, it overpowers the mind, it overpowers the brain. So what happens is, a person who is overpowered with anger, he doesn't see properly, he doesn't hear properly. So therefore, even if advice is given, he's admonished, it doesn't register. Okay? So that anger, as we mentioned earlier on, it produces, it's like boiling water, it's like a raging fire. So it goes, ultimately it raises up into the brain and it obscures the thinking. The whole cognition process becomes obscure and becomes, affected. And it may even extend to your basic senses, even the eyesight. People are really angry, their vision gets blurred, and even their hearing gets distorted. It's terrible, I mentioned, it's connected with shaitan, shaitan and nafs. So brain also becomes like a cave. There's a very, very graphic illustration that Imam Ghazali gives, saying that the brain becomes like a cave. As we said, this anger, it's coming from the fire, And so it's like a cave filled with fire, and a cave filled with fire, you can imagine, it becomes filled with smoke, and that smoke becomes black, and then the whole area becomes, it's just terrible. And so that's the kind of situation that happens in the brain. So obviously, in anger, people do all kinds of just really outlandish things because the brain is not functioning, the senses are not functioning. And even outwardly, the people, their color changes, they start shaking, and they start doing unusual things. The general way in which they carry themselves gets all distorted, And it even transforms the appearance, the veins stick out in the neck, And so in fact, people start acting like people that are mentally deranged. So it's really a terrible thing that we need to really control. Allah give us al-tawfiq. And if one were to look at himself and see the ugliness of the state, if you were looking into the mirror and see what you're looking like when you're extremely angry, so, you would really say, hey, what's wrong with me? Why am I even doing this, right? So, and then, the internal, that's the ugliness that we see outside of us. And what about the ugliness inside? That's even worse. So what are some of the elements that stir anger? And then after we understand, because the treatment of anything, here in the West or conventional medicine, what do? They kill the symptoms. But they don't go to the root causes. In our traditional medicine, be it the Ayurvedic, be it the Unani or the Greek system or the old systems of medicine, Chinese system, the old ancient and very wise systems of medicine try to identify the root of the disease, right? And the root of the disease is it always is, there's some sort of imbalance taking place. And then to correct that imbalance, right? So what we do is we just take a Panadol or a Brufen and we think the thing is, we're cured. It's not the case. It's just covering up the symptoms. The root cause has not been identified and obviously it's not been treated. So here, simply, what are the root causes of anger? And once we can understand those root causes, then we can look for, appropriate treatment. So the elements that create, anger, one is conceit. And this is one of the most common things, If someone really thinks he's conceited, we call this in Arabic rajb. He's very, as they say in the slang, he's very full of himself. He really thinks he's something. So if I really think I'm something, and then you disagree with me, or or you have some suggestion or some advice to give me. So since I think I'm so great, so it's going to, trigger that anger. So therefore, conceit is, we talked about this also when we talked about the detriments of the tongue, the afat of the lisan. In joking also, usually joking it becomes, making snide remarks about other people or, cutting them and all that kind of thing. We talked about it extensively. So obviously, this is going to produce anger. You're joking around and you belittle somebody or, and usually the joking that people do with one another, it's cutting one another, and making fun of one another. So, many times what happens is that somebody gets angry, gets offended, and he gets angry. Okay? Obviously arguments. That's, and arguments can stem from these things as well. Confrontation, To disagree with someone is, okay, we can have disagreements, but when you confront somebody, that's wrong. Why are you saying that? There's ways of, so confrontation is not, direct head-on confrontation. This is to be avoided, as far as possible. Because it's going to cause anger. When you confront somebody, he's going to become angry, obviously. And then when he gets angry, then you're going to get angry, and then it'll escalate. Betrayal, obviously. Betrayal, breach of faith. You promised to do something, or somebody took your confidence in some issue, or told you something, some secret, and so obviously that's going to bring about anger. Extreme covetousness and desire of excessive wealth and fame. This is probably, as we say, hurb ad-dunya. We really want to amass and, acquire as much wealth and fame as possible. Love of the world, love of the things, love of the creation. So these are all lowly, reprehensible characteristics according to Sharia. And the Quran and the Sunnah is replete with, as we say, the dham, accosting, what's the word I want to use for dham? It's criticizing, the critique of these type of characteristics. So what do? So each one of these should be routed by their opposites. So since these are the elements that usually bring on anger, so if we can rout out these elements, and, as they say, clip them from the bud, as it were, then we can probably avoid much of the travail of anger. So number one, conceit. So what do? We rout out those with the opposites. As we mentioned before, just like in medicine, in traditional medicine, we find an imbalance and bring a balance. So if there's too much, If there's too much sour, you need something sweet, you know. There's too much acid, you need to bring out something alkaline. So therefore, similarly, conceit, what's the opposite of conceit? Humility. You know, rather than thinking I'm so great, you know, and I'm so good, and I know everything, and I think I'm the lowest of the low. I'm the most ignorant of the ignorant, you know. And so then, nobody's going to really, you know, get me angry, because I know myself, you know, all my defects, and I'm constantly, you know, looking at my faults and my shortcomings, and so that humbles me. And I think about my humble beginning. What was I made from? You know, and all of the you know, the sins and my shortcomings, which Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, by His mercy, He covers them up. You know, so people don't see those things. So anyway, so an exercise should be done to remove conceit by adopting humility. Okay? Again, joking. So we talked about that extensively. We talked about, you know, the tongue. You know, joking, you know, any type. Nabi Sallallahu used to joke from time to time. It wasn't his, you know, like some people, we just have to be funny all the time. We just have to make people laugh. Why? That's not the characteristic of our Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. And when he did, there was a purpose for that. Perhaps, you know, people were, you know, if someone is, you know, really disturbed, or someone is really feeling down and depressed, so make them smile, make them something to make them feel happy, maybe something to make them smile, and something funny, but which has honor. There's no sort of taunting, and there's no cutting anyone, and it should be truthful. You know? And so that was the kind of, you know. So other than that, you know, joking all the time, it's definitely going to bring about, you know, anger. It's definitely going to rub somebody the wrong way, and then it's going to trigger, you know, anger. And then obviously getting into arguments, you know. And probably we mentioned early on, you know, we talked about that, you know, with the control of the tongue, that our ancestors, they would not like to argue. They wouldn't get in arguments. They would discuss, they would debate for the sake of trying to, you know, come to a conclusion as to what is right, what is wrong, what is better, what is preferred, etc. Caring less who happens to, you know, be the one which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them the ability to, you know, give the right perspective in the issue. You know? So arguments, you know, you don't get into arguments, you know. Avoid arguing at all costs, you know. And even when there's a necessity of a debate in the matters of deen, that is to be done by someone who's qualified to do so. And there's etiquettes, and that is all sort of thing. So basically, stay as far as possible from any type of arguments. And most arguments are generally based on conceit. You know, I'm right. You know, I know, you don't. That's usually what it's about, right? Okay. And then obviously confrontation. Don't confront people. If we have to even, you know, order for the right and forbid wrong, there's ways of doing that, you know. There's ways of doing that without having to be confrontational. Okay, and obviously betrayal and breach of. So we need to be very careful about, you know, looking after our, you know, our pacts, our oaths, you know, our you know, undertakings we've taken with people, you know. Otherwise it's going to end up with anger. And then obviously this last one, so that's a lifelong exercise to, you know, remove the love of the world from our hearts. And how do we do that? Probably the most effective thing is to remember death. أَكْثِرُوا مِنْ ذِكْرِ هَادِمِ اللَّذَّاتِ. Nabi Sallallahu says, you know, excessively remember that thing which will destroy the pleasures. Somebody came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, mata sa'a? When is Qiyamah going to take place? So he said, Rasulullah, so what have you prepared for it? Question is not when it's going to be. Nobody knows when it's going to be. But are you prepared for it or not? In any case, the people of Iman will not see the day of judgment, because nobody of Iman will be left in the day of judgment. All the people of Iman will be taken away. So we have the Day of Judgment we call يعني Qiyamat al-Kubra, which is that day, and then we have Qiyamat al-Sughra for each person's own Qiyamah, each own person's, Day of Judgment, which is the Day of Death. And when is that going to be? Anytime. Any day. So therefore, if we are constantly thinking about our death and preparing for it, then we won't have, our sight won't fall on the things of the world. It's like a person crossing the bridge, and there's a fire on the other, it's raging down the bridge, or there's an enemy, chasing him. So he doesn't stand on the bridge and start looking around, oh, what a beautiful view, why don't we, drop a fishing line here? Maybe we can, He's interested in crossing the bridge and getting over to the safe and secure, at the end. So similarly, that's our example here. We are travelers in this world. We're on the bridge, racing, with the enemy of shaitan and nafs and, the ill effects of the environment. It's all chasing us. So we need to get over it. So if we will continuously think about that, continuously think about our death, think about the hereafter, the loneliness of this world, etc. So inshallah, then we can remove, because usually we get angry because some type of our dunya, either our wealth or our name or our fame or our honor, there's some sort of, somebody is causing some kind of deficiency there. So what do? We get all bent out of shape and we get angry, and then we have to suffer all of those ill effects of anger. Okay, so treatment. We'll just take a couple today. There's quite a number of them, and we're going to take two today, inshallah. So number one, and probably the most important and the most accessible and the most straightforward, is reflecting on the narrations of the virtues, that's misspelled, sorry, the virtues of suppressing anger. We call it kadm al-ghayb. وَالْكَاذِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises those people who suppress their anger and they forgive the people. So similarly, there's many ayats in this connection. There's also many ahadith. And there's whole compilations, in fact. And there's whole chapters in the books of hadith. We'll do well to identify those and read them from time to time. Yeah. Okay. And also forgiveness, because usually we get angry at someone. Usually there's someone that is the attention of our anger. So excusing people, forgiving people, overlooking, forbearance, hidden. We have the ability to argue, or the ability perhaps, even take retribution or revenge, but forbearance, leaving it, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the overall betterment. It's called hidden. And toleration, tahammul, accepting it. Look at what Nabi had to put up with from Quraysh, and then ultimately from the munafiqeen, and then from the Badu, and then from whoever, Ahlul Kitab and so forth and so on. And how Nabi he behaved in all of these situations, and that's our example. And in all of those situations, there was a control of anger. And Nabi although he used to feel, the oncoming of anger. It would be seen in his face, but he would not let it, manifest, in his behavior and in his actions or in his words as well. So here's a very interesting hadith. We'll end with this. Or perhaps let's take another index after this. Okay. عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قدم عيينة بن حصن فنزل على ابن أخيه أضحر بن قيس وكان من النفر الذين يبنيهم عمر رضي الله عنه وكان قراء أصحاب مجلس عمر رضي الله عنه ومشاورته كهولا كانوا أو شبابا. قال عيينة لابن أخيه يا ابن أخي لك وجه عند هذا الأمير فاستأذن لي عليه فاستأذن فأذن له. فلما دخل قال هي ابن الخطاب هي ابن الخطاب فوالله ما تعطينا الجزر ولا تحكم فينا بالعدل فغضب عمر رضي الله عنه حتى هم أن يوقع به. فقال له الحر: يا أمير المؤمنين، إن الله تعالى قد قال لنبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم: خذ العفو وأمر بالعرف وأعرض عن الجاهلين، وإن هذا من الجاهلين. فوالله ما جاوزها عمر حين تراها وكان وقافا عند كتاب الله تعالى. رواه البخاري. Now this is an amazing riwayat. So Uyayna ibn Hisn, he was one of these chieftains from the Bedouin tribes. And there's quite a number of very interesting incidents with this individual. In any case, so he came to Medina and he stayed with his nephew Hur ibn Qais, who happened to be among the companions of Umar. He was a very intelligent man, a very intelligent young fellow, and very knowledgeable. And so these were the people that Umar used to keep in his majlis. And therefore you would find Abdullah ibn Abbas, you would find Abdullah ibn Mas'ud when he would be around, and others of that status, because and he would always take their consult with them. So that was Umar's, majlis, that was his gathering, and he used to consult with them. So Uyayna told his nephew, Hur, that the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers, he shows favor to you. So I want you to seek permission so that I can, have a sitting with him. Okay? So Hur, went to Umar and Umar said, "It's fine." Give him permission. So when Uyayna came into the presence of Umar in his Bedou, they're very famous for, being straight to the point and being very crass and very cool, but at the same time very fasih. That's the interesting thing. They would say very outlandish things, a very rough, tough, but the choice of words they used to use were very interesting. And that's why the Sahaba, they used to really like it when the Bedou used to come and ask, because they weren't allowed to ask a lot of questions. So the Bedou used to come and they used to ask these questions, and the way they used to ask was just amazing. And that's, that was the original language, comes from them. Okay. So he came and he said, and the word he uses, he didn't say ya, he said, he, Ibn al-Khattab, he, hey, He says, "Oh Ibn al-Khattab, hey son of al-Khattab, you neither bestow on us lavishly nor deal with us justly." Remember we talked about confrontation? So that's about as confrontational as you can get, right? So he just, and of course in Arabic, إنك لا تعطي الجزيل لا تعطينا الجزل ولا تحكم فينا بالعدل. Now, Umar radiallahu anhu is the most just individual after Rasulullah and Abu Bakr, there was, And of course, Umar himself was a person of, he would, as we say, he was very capable of, manifesting or, taking retribution and doing so in a very tough and rough way. So now Umar is, thinking about, catching hold of this individual. And so Hur ibn Qais, the nephew of Uyayna, says, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen." So he diffused the whole situation by saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told his Rasul, خُذِ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ. خُذِ الْعَفْوَ. Not just be forgiving, khud, take it, like it's something you really have to make an effort, because sometimes, particularly in a situation like this, you really would like to take, recompense, take retribution. So, no, just leave it. Excuse. خُذِ الْعَفْوَ وَأْمُرْ بِالْعُرْفِ. And order to what is right, order what is right and correct. وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ. And just turn away and don't pay attention to the ignorant, basically. And he pointed to his uncle, he said, "And this is one of the ignorant." So, right? So just, don't. And so Umar, as soon as he heard this ayat, he just totally chilled out. Right? وَكَانَ وَقَافًا عِنْدَ كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. So no sooner did Umar radiallahu anhu hear that, then it just diffused the whole situation and diffused Umar's anger, and he just let the whole thing slide, as it were. So that's what we mentioned, and that's what the whole point was, to remember these virtues. And just like Umar radiallahu anhu, as soon as he heard that ayat, he was just cooled out. So similarly, we should be, we should have a program of, because anger management, that's a big issue, and so probably everybody needs to actually have some sort of anger management program. So the best anger management program is what comes from Kitab and Sunnah. So there is an ayat, and so there's many ahadith and there's many ayat that also deal with the issue. Okay. Now one more treatment we'll talk about, and we'll end our session with that, inshallah. So, also, this is going to take a little bit of an intellectual exercise, So frighten oneself with the punishment of Allah. Think, for a while. Before I start taking retribution, I start thinking, wait a minute. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power over me is much more than my power over this individual that I'm considering to take retribution, from. And so, if I take out my anger on him today, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take out his anger on me tomorrow, on the day of judgment. So also that is another, prescription that, we consider that, rather than taking out retribution, we think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He deals with me, and therefore, as we've heard in many ayats and many hadith, the basic meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful to those who show mercy. So if we would like to be the recipients of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and His af and His forgiveness and His forbearance, then we should be also manifesting that. We should also be, behaving in such a way to become eligible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, for His rahmah, for His forgiveness, and for His forbearance. So these are two. So our homework would be that, these are two treatments that we can do and we can, practice. Look at the virtues of, forgiveness, forbearance, and controlling one's anger from the Quran and Sunnah. And secondly, sort of a meditation before we take out any retribution, that we think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He takes retribution from me, He's much more capable than I am. So if I will be merciful, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may show me mercy. If I show harshness, then I may be shown harshness by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So before we, in the situation where there's anger is cropping up, we use these as tools to bring about, a rebalance, and as we mentioned earlier. So, is that clear? Any questions from anyone?
Can we go back to the Arabic one? I just want to take a picture of that.
Take a picture of that? It's a very famous hadith, which is in Sahih al-Bukhari. I don't know what the projector is doing.
So actually, they briefly talk about when you have anger, how it affects your body, as well as on your amal too. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to calm down, and that's why we just mentioned the hadith of Allah ta'ala.
Yeah, so the idea is that, anger, as we mentioned earlier, it's a natural reaction, and it has its place, because there's certain instances where we're supposed to get angry. And there's certain instances where we're supposed to actually act on that anger. If we see, the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being, flouted, or we see injustice taking place, and we have the ability to, to do something about it, so that anger should propel us into appropriate action.
So some part of the treatment, like a remedy for this one, how to control it.
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yes, then you have to give the treatment, exactly.
That's what we're talking about. These are methods of control. If we can continually think about the virtues of controlling anger, then it will help us in the time of need. Similarly, if we think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He takes out His anger on us, what's going to happen?
Oh.
So if we start getting angry with everybody and taking out our revenge and retribution, then suppose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes His on us.
Right.
So we should think, you know. Kamata dinu tudan. As you treat others, you'll be treated. You know, so. And then we've got a number of other, you know, methods of treatment as well. Inshallah, we'll talk about that in our next session, inshallah ta'ala.
There's one more line, right? When Umar ibn Khattab heard the other.
Okay.
No.
He memorized it. He make a picture. He memorized it.
We should.
He mentioned
This is exactly what we need to do. This is why we mentioned that. I'll just go back to these elements.
Right.
These are the elements that bring on anger. So if we can work on these things, conceit, joking, arguments, confrontation, betrayal, you know, breach of trust, faith, and extreme covetousness, you know, desire of excessive wealth and fame, basically love of dunya, right? So we try and counterbalance those things with their opposites. Treat them with their opposites. You say the mu'alaja bil adad, you know, treat the things with their opposites. Okay? Allah give me and all of us tawfiq. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك.